started to create a title and we've started to change the font and play around with it, but in actual fact we want this one to say welcome, not Andrew, so I'm going to select it, make sure the text is selected and write welcome to Cs6. And then I can select all of that text and I can play around with how it looks. Now obviously I want it center justified, and now I want the text to look different. I'm quite happy with the font, but actually it's not in the middle. So if I go down here, you see I've got a line option, so I can center it vertically and center it horizontally, so it's absolutely slap bang in the middle of the screen. And I want to change how it looks. I can play around with the font size, so I can make that bigger or smaller as I like. And I can change the aspect ratio of it, so making it wider or thinner. But I can also play with the leading. Now the leading refers to the distance between the lines. In the old days of print, to separate lines of text out, the printer would put lines of lead. So if I start to pull leading down, I'm actually going to pull those letters closer together. Now just a little note on leading: if you have things very close together, it can actually make people feel quite tense. And if you have things very wide apart, it can make people feel more relaxed. So do play around with your leading, because you can get some quite interesting effects playing with leading. Kerning is playing with the distance between the letters. So that's just playing the distance between the letters. And then tracking is how wide and how separate the letters are from the middle outwards. We're going from the middle simply because we're center justified. If we were left justified or right justified, it would be tracking those letters in and out from wherever the justification happens to be. So we're at center justified and we're tracking in and out from the middle, just to give ourselves either a wider feel or a closer, more condensed feel. Baseline shift is simply going to shift the text up and down. So if this E needed to be much smaller, I could change the font size from 203 down to something much smaller, and if I then do baseline shift, I can then make it welcome with a little E at the end to make it look slightly odd. But that's how you can do baseline shift, and that's really what it's about. I'm going to take baseline shift back to 0, and I'm also going to take the font of that particular character back up to 303. So that's baseline shift. Obviously we've got slant, so we can actually make the whole thing italics or not. Depends how much is selected. If I select the whole thing, I should make slant 0 at the moment, and double click to select all the text, or click and drag from the top down, then we can actually do slant depending on how you want it to look. And you can change the whole thing to small caps. Well, it is already small caps, that's a feature of the actual font that we're using, but it still makes a difference when you click between the two. If I choose a different font, click in the font family and go down to choose another font like that one there, and I choose small caps on that one, you'll see that it does make quite a big difference to how it looks. But also you can change the size of it. At the moment the small caps are 75% of the main size, but I can change those to become a lot smaller if I want to. So you can play around with it however you want. You can even add an underline. So by clicking an underline, the whole thing can be underlined. Clearly this isn't in the right place now, so I might want to go back to my align panel to justify it right slap bang into the middle. We do have a distort option here, which means you can distort the X that's going across, so we can make the going across either the top or the bottom closer or further apart, and Y is up and down, so we can make it look quite weird and wonky if we want to. So you can play with distort. If you're doing something for Halloween, you might well want to play with distort to make something look a little bit more uneasy for your viewer. And then we can get into quite an interesting area, which is fill. Now at the moment we're filled with white, and at the moment it says it's a linear gradient. It's not a solid, it's a linear gradient. Well, a solid is literally what it says. It's a solid, and you can change it to any colour you like. So if I wanted to fill it with the colour of the sea, I could either click the picker and go to the colour of the sea I wanted to fill it with, say that one there, or alternatively you can click in this little box here and it opens up a colour picker, and you can change that colour to whatever you want it to be, and I can click OK and it updates it here. At the moment I'm going to take it straight back to white and click OK. So that's a solid. You can also turn its opacity right down so that it's hardly visible, depending on what you want to achieve. Opacity is basically at 0 it's completely invisible, and at 100% you can't see through it. It's like paint on a wall. But there are other fill types. Notice we've got a solid, but we've also got something called linear gradient, which is what it was originally. But if you click on one of these paint pots, or one of these pickers and then click the color gradient bit and change its color, you'll see what a gradient does. It goes from one color to another color, and you can pull it so that it's a little bit or more. You can move them around, and you can have a very sharp line between them by moving them very close together, or you can have a very general line by moving these pickers or paint pots, as I call them, around. And you can change the other one. You click on the other one, the other picker or paint pot, click on it, and we can change that if we want to say a cyan or a blue really, and then you can change how it looks. But not only do you have a linear gradient, you have a radial gradient. A radial gradient isn't going to show very well on this particular one because of the way that the text is laid out, but you can move radial gradients up and down depending on how they're set up. There you go, we're just beginning to see it. Basically a radial gradient is a circular gradient going from outside to in or inside to out, and it can give a very different look, but it all depends where the text is, so I don't think that's going to work for us particularly well. But we also have a 4-color gradient, and that allows us to change all 4 colors. So as long as you select a picker or a corner and choose the color picker here, you can completely change the color to something else entirely, and then you're going to have 4 colors, and you can change all 4 colors to different colors to give you the sort of look that you want. This is going to look truly ghastly, but it's just to give you an idea. So 4-color gradient, and then we've got a few other options which you can play with in your own time. I'm going to take this back to a solid color, and I'm going to leave it at, yeah, yellow's fine. Might make it just a little bit brighter. So a nice bright yellow. Welcome to Sea Houses. Now we can also add lots of different bits and pieces. A sheen is simply a line that goes through it. You can see the sheen there, and you can change its size, so you can make it quite wide, and you can change its colour. So at the moment it's white, but if I wanted to make it more obvious, maybe I'd make it a red. And there you can see the sheen going through, and you can change where its offset is, so how high or how low it is through the text, just making your text look that little bit more interesting, that little bit more fun. If you play with the angle, by the way, it won't angle as one item through the text, but it will angle on each individual letter, which can give an interesting look, but it's not a look that I have to say I use a great deal. So I'm just going to leave the sheen on. You can, if you want, add a texture, but that requires you to add a file. So when you click texture, you can fill this text with an image. You click the little icon here, which is really sort of like a transparency grid, and that allows you to go and pick an image. Now the only image I've got is, say, the menu image, which I can double click to bring in, and now that menu image, you can see the actual image here, which was the grotty flags from long ago, is actually filling up the text. So if you've got, say, you're doing something on metalwork and you might have a really rough metal background, you can actually bring the image in to fill your text in to give a really good look. I'm going to turn texture off because I don't really need to use it, and there are plenty of options you can do with that. One of the ones I do use a great deal are strokes, because if you have got bright text and a bright background, you won't be able to see the text. But if you have dark text and a dark background, you won't be able to see the text again. But if you have bright text with a dark stroke, or dark text with a bright stroke, then you'll always be able to see it regardless of how bright or dark the background is. So you can add inner strokes which come inside the letters, and outer strokes which come outside the letters. I'm going to add an outer stroke, and it's a black stroke, suits me fine. You can play around with different types of stroke, but look how visible that has become. How quickly it was to make something that looked great. So I'm just going to scroll up strokes, not going to add any more, but you can add lots of different strokes, lots of different colours inside and out, which can create wonderful results. This is basically, do you want a drop shadow or not? So if you click shadow, you can create a drop shadow, gives you a slightly three-dimensional look, and I think makes the whole thing look a lot better. Again, you can play with it. Distance is effectively how far away it is from the actual original image, and you can make it bigger and smaller, and you can make it more opaque. It's up to you to play with. And of course you can add a background item. You don't have to have this thing behind it. Say I actually wanted to use that flag image as a background image, and again I can go down and I can actually choose a texture. Open up the texture, choose that same image and choose open. Now that background image will be saved with this title. So that title will include the background image if I have selected that I want a background image. But if I don't select a background image, nothing's going to be saved except the text that I've got. Now, I've created this title. Just make sure again that it's in the right place because I've fiddled around with it, and I'm ready to apply it to my footage. How do I do that? There's nothing here that is very obvious. Well, the first thing to do is shut down this window. I'm actually going to click the X, shut the window down, because in my bin here is my title ready to go, and I can take that, drag it onto my timeline and drop it directly on top of the beginning of my timeline. So now when I start off, I've got black and I can see it coming in. Now if I actually want to fade on this title, I can also add a transition to it. We've done transitions before, so I go to my effects panel, my video transitions, and I choose a dissolve, and I would probably choose something like a cross dissolve, drop it on the front, and then when I go to the beginning you'll see it fades on really nicely. And if I take the cross dissolve and drop it on at the end, you'll see it also fades off nicely as well. So that's how we can create a title and add a title. There's an awful lot more to titles, and I will show you that in due course. One thing that I haven't pointed out before that I probably should have done is that when an item is used in the project, you do get a little item saying it is used, and if you hover over it you can see how many times it's used. So there we go, we've got a title, and hover over it and it says it's a video and it's used one time. So if I then go up and I go to, say, my video, so Control or Command double click, you can see that it's showing me that both the video and the audio for this clip is used 3 times, and this particular one is used 1 time, and this particular one is used twice. This particular one isn't used at all. Okay, so you can see that you get feedback even in the project panel as to what we're doing. Now in the next tutorial we're going to carry on having a closer look at titles.